And you are podcasting with Gary DeMar. Let's figure things out.
In the September 8th, 2024 interview that Tucker Carlson did with Glenn Beck when Tucker Carlson was out in Utah, they started talking about essentially what do we do given the circumstances of the day. And one of the items that came up initially by Glenn Beck is that he was sitting around with some Bible scholars. He does not tell us who these Bible scholars were. And they were dealing with the end times, which, again, this becomes the kind of the schizophrenia of the conservative movement. Now, Glenn Beck is a Mormon, and I don't know how much information he has on eschatological matters. I know that he had on his show some time ago Max Lucado, who I never really thought much of, being someone dealing with Bible prophecy, but they were discussing the end times prophecies unfolding around us, and I believe by this time Max Lucado has a book out on Bible prophecy. And the argument was, in the interview that Glenn did with Max Lucado on Glenn's show, the argument was that while World War II carried with it the possibility of Christ returning, Beck and Lucado reasoned that there wasn't enough biblical prophecy to play to seal the end time deal. But this time around, in that particular interview, the missing ingredient, according to them, has finally been added to the mix, and that is, we've got Gog and Magog, said Glenn Beck. For the very first time in the history of the world, Gog and Magog are now in play. And by Gog and Magog, what they're referring to there is, in most cases, it's Russia's invasion of Israel. And Lucado responded with a smile and nodded in agreement. And this is the great irony of Beck's and Lucado's statement. Far from the first time, we've got Gog and Magog for the 100th time, going back centuries. American Vision published, I think around the year 2000, Frank Gummerlock's book, The Day and the Hour, which is a history of date setting, and not necessarily specific date setting, but just saying, here are the major prophetic players during these various centuries, beginning very, very, very early in church history. And I can guarantee you the Gog and Magog prophecy of Ezekiel 38 and 39 figures predominantly throughout history. And I've got books in my library. I've got tons of books in my library, and many of them dealing with the Gog and Magog battle, and going back at least to the 1940s, where again Russia was supposedly the bad guy. You also see this in Hal Lindsey's The Late Great Planet Earth, where again you find Gog and Magog mentioned, and this is modern day Russia. Ray Comfort wrote a book a number of years ago, and then he came out with a new book, which really isn't new. It's kind of a ripoff. It's interviews with people, and the exegesis in it is essentially non-existent. They're simply following the popular way of interpreting Ezekiel 38 and 39, and it's called Volatile. The nations, the Bible says, will attack Israel in the latter days. So the nations that will attack Israel in the latter days, and of course, this is all based upon Ezekiel 38 and 39. I'm not going to go into all the details of Ezekiel 38 and 39, but Ezekiel 38 and 39, if you read it without the prejudice of modern day prophecy writers, you will notice a couple of things. The first thing you will notice is that this battle that takes place, described in Ezekiel 38 and 39, takes place with bows and arrows, spears, horseback, shields, bucklers, chariots. These are old world instruments of warfare. Now, in the second part of this, these people who interpret the Bible literally say, oh, no. What you're really reading there is God's way of symbolically telling us this could happen at any time, and none of these weapons is to be taken literally. Some have gone so far as to say that the bows and arrows, that's really it can be missile launchers and missiles. And chariots, of course, can be tanks. This is just preposterous. And the part of the problem in dealing with Ezekiel 38 and 39 for these people is this battle skips over all kinds of history post Ezekiel's prophecy. And I maintain, along with James Jordan, this came from James Jordan, and other people have come to a similar conclusion using Jim's work. This is not unique to me. James Jordan has wrote just a short booklet on how the book of Esther really is the fulfillment of what you find in Ezekiel 38 and 39. It's a fascinating study, and I dealt with this in the Gog and Magog End Time Alliance. It's a book. You can get that at American Vision. And it shows the parallels are just remarkable between what you find in Esther and what you find in Ezekiel 38 and 39. Even the name of Haman Gog, is mentioned in Ezekiel 39. Haman is the bad guy of the book of Esther. And again, I won't go into all the details with this, but what's happening among a lot of popular prophecy writers and people who really aren't schooled in this topic very well, that they're following the kind of the popular narrative out there. They really don't have any historical analysis of what is going around today in terms of these Bible prophecy. And Glenn Beck is one of these guys. Max Lucado probably comes out of more of a dispensational Dallas Theological Seminary training on all this. This is where all of this gets revved up, and then of course when Russia invaded Ukraine, this is the Russia of Ezekiel 38 and 39. It never stops. Well, back to Ray Comfort. Ray Comfort has a very large audience. And he deals in the area of apologetics and evangelism, and most of what he says about those things is quite good. Years ago, I confronted him on his prophetic work, and he, in a phone call with me. In fact, I'm looking at here right now. I've got his phone number and his address, and I called him and I said, Ray, look, let me give you a different perspective on this. And here's what he told me. In our phone conversation, he said, I guess I really don't know much about Bible prophecy, and I think I'm not going to deal with it much anymore. That hasn't stopped him. He's come out with more and more stuff about the end times. And in fact, he wrote this: I'm going to show you how Iran is hidden in Bible prophecy. The nation of Iran has finally come out of the closet. Never before has it openly attacked Israel. Like a camouflaged predator, it has remained snarling in the shadows, but it's never attacked. And the thing is, it's so hidden that you won't find Iran mentioned in the Bible. And as I mentioned earlier, Comfort published the book, Russia Will Attack Israel. And this was in 1991. So this is more than 30 years ago that Ray Comfort wrote his book. And he quotes from the May 1982 Reader's Digest article, Countdown in the Middle East. And this is a quotation. The Soviets are entrenched all around the rim of the Middle East heartland, in Afghanistan, South Yemen, Ethiopia, and Libya. The thing is, the Soviets pulled out of Afghanistan, and there was mention of was Ukraine, or the fact that the United Soviet Socialist Republics would soon be dissolved, as it was on December 26, 1991. So again, you've got this idea of taking a Bible prophecy, and as the historical situation changes, as the newspaper headlines change, you will find the prophetic prognostication changes. And this is what has happened and continues to happen today. And so what's going on in the world today, and what Glenn Beck and Tucker Carlson are going to talk about in terms of their interview, it's the same old newspaper exegesis, looking at the events of the day and then trying to plug those events into prophetic texts that most likely already have been fulfilled. Now, that doesn't mean there's no application in terms of what took place then. You still have tyrants, you still have beasts, you still have wars, and so forth and so on. But you have to understand Bible prophecy in its historical context and also the timing elements in all of this. You can't keep changing the historical circumstances in terms of what's happening today. So somebody who wrote these things 30 some years ago, and Hal Lindsey wrote his Late Great Planet Earth back in 1970. We're talking about more than a half a century ago. This was a potboiler of a bestseller, back then, and it's just mind-boggling. And unfortunately, most people today aren't privy to this type of thing. Anybody who read Late Great Planet Earth, if they were born in 1970, they didn't read Late Great Planet Earth. They probably didn't read it when they were 10 years old, and they might have read it when they were 20 years old. Well, if that's the case, then 1970, today's 2024. These people are in their 60s and 70s, and so this is different. Today is different because everything you're seeing around us today is much, much different from what we saw back then. You can't be a prophetic prognosticator and keep changing your views regarding what you read in the newspaper. The first thing to note in Glenn Beck's interview with Tucker Carlson is Glenn Beck makes this comment about how the apostles were wrong. Let me cue this up for you. The first thing Glenn Beck says is he knows the ending. So he has already capitulated to the idea that the ending is soon. It's right on the horizon for us. And since he knows the ending, he doesn't say what's there to worry about, but this idea of kind of a conservative, Bible-believing schizophrenia, trying to get Christians involved, but at the same time telling us that we are living near the end of a prophetic inevitability.
For thousands of years, people have waited. The apostles said it was coming in their lifetime, the second coming of Christ. It is going to be a nightmare. Read the book.
What you just heard is typical of the way Bible prophecy is taught today. The New Testament teaches very clearly that there was a coming of Christ before that generation passed away. It is self-evident, and every Bible commentator who deals with these prophecies understands it seems like that's what Jesus was saying, but it couldn't be because he didn't come. So you got two options here. Well, I don't know how many options you have here, but here are a couple of them. One of them is to say that they were mistaken. In fact, Glenn Beck earlier said the apostles were mistaken. Then you have to say, but that Jesus was mistaken. He said he was going to come before their generation passed away, and he didn't come. He didn't come. And you have atheists who have used that argument to dismiss the integrity of the Bible. This is standard fare among atheists. Oh yeah, Jesus said he was going to come before that generation passed away, and he didn't. And as the result, you can't trust what the Bible has to say. So what's kind of interesting about that kind of argument, and this is kind of an aside, most liberals maintain that the New Testament books of the Bible were written after the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. And if that's the case, why in the world would the New Testament writers have put in something that was a mistake? I have one Bible commentator here, 2-volume thick commentary on Matthew, say, no, that was a sign of integrity, that they admitted that Jesus was mistaken. So we can believe the Bible because the New Testament writers were honest about it. It's just nonsense. It was very specific. The New Testament taught that Jesus was going to return before that generation passed away. And he returned before that generation passed away. We find it in Matthew chapter 10, you find it in Matthew chapter 16, you see it in Matthew chapter 24 and 25, you see it in Luke 17, Luke 19, Luke 21, Mark 13. It is chock full of prophetic material saying these events were going to take place before that generation passed away. And you cannot get around those things. And so what's happened is, because people don't believe that or have reinterpreted that, like, well, it's the generation that sees these signs that will not pass away. It's not what the text says. It says this generation will not pass away. And the problem even with that in Matthew chapter 24, 34, that verse 33 says, Jesus says to his disciples, the audience to whom he was speaking, when you see these signs. And so you can't say, well, it means this race of people or this kind of generation. That's not, first of all, in terms of the race, it's the wrong Greek word. And in terms of, well, this kind of generation will not pass away, that's not the way this generation is used in the Gospels. This generation refers to the generation to whom Jesus was speaking. I can't fault Glenn Beck too much for this, and I can't fault Tucker Carlson at all for this, because these guys really have not studied this. And so this is what we're dealing with here. Here we are. Tucker Carlson is trying to energize a nation, to bring change to society. And Glenn Beck is trying to do the same thing. And then Glenn Beck is telling people we're living on the precipice of the end. Well, it becomes a prophetic inevitability here. Well, how much time? Well, we don't know, because the New Testament says these things were going to happen soon, that these things were going to shortly take place. Yeah, they were going to happen soon and shortly for that particular generation. And just like Jesus said they would, that's exactly what took place. That's why Jesus gave a very descriptive understanding of what was going to take place in terms of the localness of this coming judgment in Matthew chapter 24, where it could be escaped on foot by going to the mountains outside of the city of Israel. On foot. People were living in flat-roofed homes. A cloak was something that was prized and necessary in Israel at that time. The Sabbath was still operating. This is all dismissed by a lot of prophecy writers in order to get people. I don't know what the goal of all this is, because it's not going to happen the way they think it's going to happen. We could go through another horrible, terrible war like we did with World War I, World War II, and 2 nuclear explosions. And friends, we are still here. Tucker Carlson then goes and asks Glenn Beck, he said, what are some of these signs? And then Glenn Beck says the breakdown in society. And he goes through and it talks about this evil in the world that we're seeing today. Now, I've done a little bit of historical study on a number of things, but there were times when there were mass executions, ripping the hearts out of people, cannibalism. I mean, in the 17th century and earlier, you came to the Aztecs and that part of Central and South America, and the horrors that were seen. And you go to other places in the world at that particular period of time, they were blood curdling what you saw taking place. And if it wasn't for the Christian West, those things probably would have still been going on. I suggest you pick up a book that I've been reading. I don't agree with everything in this book, but it's called Pagan America, The Decline of Christianity and the Dark Age to Come. And John Daniel Davidson describes some of these atrocities throughout history. And of course, you had Adolf Hitler and the near ratification of the eradication of the Jews. We dropped 2 bombs during World War II. We've had wars and rumors of wars throughout history. Say, oh, today is different. Today, one of the reasons it's different today is because we hear about it more, because we have news cameras and everywhere we have 24/7 news reports. And one of the things that we often don't hear about in our culture today are the good things that are taking place. There are a lot of good things taking place, and we don't hear much about them. And if we capitulate to this idea that we are living on the precipice of some end time event and that there's nothing you can do about it and Jesus is going to come back and rescue us from this, but why are we bothering, Glenn and Tucker? What's the deal here? Say, well, we still need to be responsible for all of this, but we're living on the end. It's all going to go down. Of course, my theory is, and I've used this passage before, from 2 Timothy 3. Where the Apostle Paul gives us description of what was taking place in Timothy's day. And Paul said, they will not make further progress, for their folly will be obvious to all. And that's what we're seeing in our culture today, the folly of unbelieving thought. Now, there are implications and ramifications of that, but they only escalate because I believe Christians pull back from society. We're not supposed to get involved, politically. Just preach the gospel. There's nothing we can do. We need to have a perfect candidate, and as a result, we see evil proliferate. And are we to believe that because of our irresponsibility in many of these areas that God's going to rescue us? I just don't think that's the way it works, because that's not the way it worked for the last 2,000 years. We are responsible for what is going to take place in our culture, and we need to get off this idea that we're living on the end times bandwagon. Glenn says the hour is nearing, and at the same time he says this, he talks about bystanders, by just sitting, watching this evil take place and not doing anything about it. But if there's a prophetic inevitability attached to all of this, there's not anything that we do to try to stop any of this. It may stop on the short term, but it's just not in the prophetic cards. Let me add at this point that Glenn brings in a conversation he had with a longtime atheist who acknowledges that there is evil in the world. And as I point out in my book, Why It Might Be Okay to Eat Your Neighbor, if atheism is right, can anything be wrong? That is the essence of the moral problem that atheists have. There is no way to account for evil, and therefore there is no way to stop evil, because you don't know what's evil or what is good. And they bring up the topic of transgenderism, that if men can become women, women can become men, and men are treated one way and women are treated another way. And that's no longer the case, because we have evolved over times and we're all the same. Women are not to be treated any different from men. The only reason women are treated different from men is because of a creational account, given that men and women are different. You take that away and nothing is good or evil. DNA neither cares, we just dance to its music, Richard Dawkins has said. But again, if this is a prophetic inevitability, what can we possibly do to change it in the long term? Then Glenn Beck, I think, makes a great statement where he says, we need to stand up that these things will not take place on our watch. Great. I'm all for that. But at the same time, we're telling people, wait a minute, we're living in the end times, and this is all predicted in the end times. And so, again, for the short term, you may be able to stand up, but you're not going to win anything, because we're living in the end times, because all the signs are pointing that Jesus is going to return pretty soon. Here's what I suggest you do. Listen to the interview and ignore everything they say about Bible eschatology. They don't know what they're talking about. This is just typical end time speculation. But listen to what Glenn Beck and Tucker Carlson are calling for, to get involved and stand up and do something about it. Do something for the long term, not just do something for the short term, but generational things we need to be doing. We really need to understand the long-term effects of a Christian worldview, while the collapsing worldview of unbelief, the collapsing worldview of killing unborn children, the collapsing worldview of homosexuality, the collapsing worldview of transgenderism, the collapsing worldview of people just not having children, should show us that the other side has no winning strategy other than power and the taking on of more power and authority. What we need to be doing while their worldview collapses is the important thing. Get off the prophecy click. And I would, what I would tell you to do is to contact Tucker Carlson and even Glenn Beck, and saying your view on eschatology is an inhibitor of getting people involved. And this has been going on for a very, very long time. So I'm thankful that the crowd cheering when Glenn Beck said we need to stand up and we need to do something. I just hope they don't get caught up in the next time some preacher comes along and tells them we're living in the end times and Jesus is coming back soon, because what one hand does, the other hand has to have some knowledge of, and unfortunately, Bible prophecy seems to be driving the cart of prophetic speculation and inhibiting the impact that Christians can have in their world.
Thanks for podcasting with Gary DeMar. Please subscribe and share this with anyone you think really needs to hear it.